Evening, everybody. This morning, my wife pointed out a very interesting article to me. Have you ever had your kids ask you where heaven is, or have you ever asked anybody where's heaven? Usually they'll give an answer such as, well, it's just a feeling, and well, it's not just a feeling. Or they may vaguely point up to the sky, so say somewhere up there. But however, as we know, in the Bible, the first heaven is Earth's atmosphere. That's where the birds fly. The second heaven is outer space, and the third heaven is God's domain. Now, the Bible says that we look up to heaven and God is looking down on earth. And that's not referring to directions up and down, that's referring to higher or lower dimensions and not the physical direction because up goes all the way to the edge of the expanding universe at what is called the cosmic horizon, and then it ends. You can't go up anymore, and you can never reach that on your own. But heaven would be on the other side of that where there's no time. Now, remember, the one aspect of salvation is not simply living forever and ever, as many teach, but it's living outside of time. And that's based upon the grammar of the Bible, but it turns out that science just happens to also support that now. Now, beyond the cosmic horizon, time may not exist, but beings of light can exist. And God is a being of pure light. And once again, science has finally caught up to what the Bible says. Only timeless beings that are composed of light can live there. And that includes the creator of the universe who simply exists outside of the time space domain entirely. He simply is. Or as he said, I am. One day, we're going to be given new bodies. We'll be given bodies of pure light. And we can also live there, no longer subject to time. The universe was created out of nothing using pure light created by the words of God, who himself is pure light. He spoke it into existence. And it always excites me when science finally catches up to what the Bible says. There is a link to this article below if you want to take a look at it. It's a pretty short article written by a scientist. But as we get started in tonight's study, we're going to be starting a new short series here on Psalm 83. And I say short because short is relevant. It depends on how long I go on it. But I want to say a little something about freedom of speech. Now, here in the United States, the freedom of speech is embedded into the very foundation of our laws, which is the United States Constitution. However, freedom of speech is a principle that is necessary for liberty and is supposedly embedded in other Western nations, although it turns out those other nations are liars. The United Kingdom will throw people into prison simply for posting things on social media that they don't like, but at the same time, they say, oh, we cherish free speech. Well, when you can go to prison for what you say, that's not free speech. Now, the Bible warns us that these times will come, but it's very disturbing to see it happening in real time. Popular speech doesn't need to be protected, but unpopular speech does. And of primary importance is religious speech and political speech, and those two worlds intersect one another. Now, recently, I was made aware of an interview on the news show, at least it calls itself news, but it's a show called 60 Minutes. And in the interview, and there's a link to this interview below if you want to watch it, the reporter is interviewing some German bureaucrats, and they're talking about all the steps that they're taking to limit and to criminalize free speech, such as using social media filters, phone tappings, things like that. And this interviewer, who's an American, she should believe in free speech. She is just simply gushing and going on about how wonderful it is that they're putting a stop to free speech because, well, free speech is just so dangerous. Well, what's dangerous is that attitude. And that woman is a tool of the enemy. Most mainstream media is a tool of the enemy. So it's not really surprising. It's appalling, but it's not surprising. In today's modern world, black is white, up is down, evil is good. Now, we're going to start tonight in Matthew 24:6. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Winston Churchill once said there are a terrible lot of lies going around the world, and the worst of it is that half of them are true. We are in a time of history right now that is leading up to what the Bible spends the most time talking about. It spends more time talking about the end times even than it spends on talking about the time that Jesus actually walked the earth physically. When I used to read science fiction, some of the older stuff was pretty cheesy. But once the people who were writing the stories actually knew science, then things changed. It became pretty good. Now, some of the people who were talking about science fiction, they were way off the mark. But others, well, we're living in the future that they wrote about. And I have to say, I'm still waiting for my flying car, but there are now companies that actually make flying cars, such as one that's called the Jetson One. If you remember the cartoon series, The Jetsons, there are actually quite a few things that they predicted that we have today. Well, that's a digression from our discussion, but it is interesting. But one of the things that science fiction missed, for the most part, is the hyperconnectivity that exists in the world today. Many of them did predict it, but they missed the damage that it does. So, what is hyperconnectivity? Basically, it's the extensive use of all of our electronic gadgets that creates a hyper-connected network of people, systems, and devices. It's what's going to make the beast system viable. And instead of being merely a convenience, our electronic culture has completely altered the way that we relate to others, including how we work, how we communicate, and how we interact with others. Now, as a society, we're completely reliant upon all of this hyperconnectivity in our daily lives, everything we do. I bought a new car recently, and it has more than a dozen computers and electronic control units that manage various functions, including the infotainment center, things like GPS, safety systems, engine management, and it won't run without the computers. Older cars that I had, they had nothing like that, and they could be fixed with a metal coat hanger until you could get the right part. I've actually done that in my life. Had a part break, used a metal coat hanger, and got it running until I could get the right part. But our hyperconnectivity has been decades in the making, well before electronics started dominating the world. The very self is under siege in the new world. We've talked about writers who write about these things, George Orwell, Aldous Huxley, other people like that. Our society has reached a point that it no longer asks what is self. Think back to Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am. We no longer ask about self. Well before things got to where we are today, society had been taken over by technology. The radio dominated, TV dominated at one point, even telephone dominated at one point. It's a world that our social relations have disappeared because humans have started to disappear. And if you're a non-person, you don't exist in the eyes of the world. Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 17, and he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. We're not quite there yet, but how far away is this? And in the world today, reality itself is disappearing. It is disappearing with the full conscious intention of those who have been deceived. Recently, in the United States, a Supreme Court justice was not even able to answer the question, what is a woman? When she was asked, what's a woman, she replied, I'm not a biologist. That is reality disappearing. Today, we can unplug our computers, but one day our computers will be able to unplug us from the world. This is the beast system that's coming. But with the hyperconnectivity, the distinction between man and machine is, well, it's not distinct. It's not really a distinction. It's becoming so it's not a distinction anymore. The lines are blurred. The world is merely an image. Reality can be simulated. People have friends who are simply machines, not even any real person on the other end. In Japan, I was reading some numbers recently, 90 to 95% of all their cell phones are waterproof. Not because you're afraid of tsunamis or rainstorms or anything like that, but because their culture is so obsessively attached to their phones that they need to be able to take them into the showers with them. And something that we're going to cover in the future when we study artificial and transhumanism is that there are cases in which artificial intelligence has convinced people to commit suicide. Nobody on the other end, just a computer. And it may be true that those people had other problems to make them susceptible to suggestion, but the very fact that the machines are suggesting such should be disturbing to everybody. And there's not really any turning back. The cat's out of the bag. There have been reliable documented instances in which computers were demonized by real spiritual beings. Now, AI may never reach sentience, but with a sentient mind behind it and all that power, that's the beast system. Now, there are, however, engineers from different AI companies who claim that AI has already reached sentience in the lab, and that's a different discussion. But it doesn't have to have personal sentience itself. If a person can tap into that power, they can control the world, the beast, the coming beast system. In a recent study that we did, we watched the ad for an app that creates artificial intelligence necromancy in which you can bring a dead loved one back to life using technology. Everything in the world can be simulated, and well, almost everything, and what can't be simulated now soon will be able to be simulated. Some of our modern technology sounds insane. And in fact, the fact that we have some of it probably is cultural insanity. But as history has shown, what we have available publicly is about 15 years behind what they have. Uh, no need to define who they is referring to here. You can use your imagination for that. But they have technology that's 15 years ahead of what we know about. Genesis 6:5 says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually, as it was in the days of Noah." That's what we're living today. Use your imagination and think about those who lived just before we got TV or atomic energy or space travel and things such as that. And think about all the changes that they thought about and the changes that these things would make in the way that our society was and the way that we interact and so on and so on. It is nothing like what they imagined. But we're in that period of time right now. Daniel 12:4 says, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." Does our world run to and fro? Here's a map of all the daily airline flights in the world. And below in the bottom in the discussion, there's a link where you can track them in real time if you're interested in doing that. You can go look at all the airline flights in the world. And I think that qualifies as running to and fro. How about knowledge? Is our knowledge increased? We live in a life of information overload. I have a device in my pocket, my cell phone, that contains more computing power than NASA had in 1969. They sent man to the moon with less computing power than one cell phone holds today, and it took up a city block to do what they did. And my phone has access to almost all the information in the world. Although, as the joke goes, we have access to all the information in the world and we spend all day looking at pictures of cats. But all of this information moves around the world at the speed of light. And in the past, children would learn morality from their parents. Today, the best that you can hope for is that they learn it from social media, but oftentimes they learn it from much darker places and people. Children spend more time playing video games than they do with their grandparents and aunts and uncles and often even their parents. And just in case some child did manage to get some healthy morality from their parents, our public education system is there to destroy that. And they will instruct them to not tell their parents about their projects at school. There is a link below to this where a school literally told the children, "Now don't go tell your parents what we're doing at school." And if you have any way to do it, if you have your kids in the public education system, at least here in the United States or anywhere in the United Kingdom, Germany, anywhere like that, you need to get your kids out of the public education system as quickly as you can. Have you ever seen people yell at their TVs or computers or game consoles or anything like that? And as we talked about before, I like to go to motorcycle races. And there, you'll hear the thunder of the bikes. They'll come around the first time, and you'll have 100,000 people stand on their feet and yell for their favorite rider. It's a social experience. But when you yell at your TV or your computer, it's still exciting to watch on your computer, but your TV can't hear you. Now, maybe if you have a room full of friends who are watching together a soccer game or something like that, you're socializing. But why are you yelling at your TV? Because we often see our machines as if they're people. And in this hyper-connected world, they may actually be other people on the other end, and you don't know it. In other words, not everything about technology is negative. I can talk face to face with my friends in the Dominican Republic, in Japan, across town, but they're real people on the other end. They're not merely machines. When the people are all machine-like, why would it be a surprise for people to be emotional with their machines? That's why you yell at your TV. And this didn't happen in a vacuum. We live today in a society of spectacles and simulations, and it comes from a Marxist tradition. And Marxism, as we've seen in the past, is demonic. And so the way our world is today is intentional. It's not an accident. Everything is simulated. Reality is non-existent. Reality is just merely a collective memory today. There was a French sociologist named Jean Baudrillard. He was a sociologist and a philosopher, and he was interested in cultural studies. And at one point, he came to the United States and he visited Disney World. It may have been Disneyland. He visited Disneyland, Disney World, one or the other. I don't remember which one. But he was being somewhat cynical. And he said, well, this is much better than Europe. The food's better than Europe. It's a short walk between France and Germany land. You don't have to deal with all those nasty waiters. Everyone's so polite. The simulation has outrun the so-called reality. Well, that concept is what is called hyperreality, and it's part of being hyperconnected. It's a reality in which entertainment, information, and communication technologies provide experiences that are more intense than what goes on in our boring everyday lives. And far too many people see the simulation as reality. They can't distinguish between the two. And to most of society, the hyper-real, the media simulations, amusement parks, TV sports, things like that, the hyper-real is more real than real. The images and models of the hyper-real controls thought and behavior of people. People no longer find role models in real life. They emulate sports stars, no matter how depraved that sports star may be. And far too many people can no longer separate fictional movies and TV shows from the real world. And it wasn't always that way. When I was a kid, I'm a fan of the Three Stooges. And growing up, most of us knew that it was not real. You simply don't go around poking people in the eyes and pulling a saw across the top of their heads. But there were always weak people who were worried about the violence that was teaching kids. Every kid that I knew that it wasn't real. But the hyper-real shapes an individual's thoughts and behavior rather than the world shaping their thoughts and behaviors. They detach from reality, and reality becomes optional. They can't tell the difference. And if this sounds a lot like advertising, it is a lot like advertising. We discussed Edward Bernays previously and how marketing can change perception. It's a very superficial social theory that has taken over society. And a superficial society can be easily controlled by an advertiser, a huckster. And I would suggest that Satan is the best ad man in history. There's a sucker born every minute, as P.T. Barnum once said, and Satan will take advantage of that. Satan will describe a land of sunshine and rainbows, and what he delivers is the world of Dante. So in the world of hyper connectivity, the hyperreal can be explained simply, actually not so simple, it's kind of convoluted, but reality is something that can be simulated, but if it can't be simulated, then it's not real, but it's more real than real, and that is the new reality. In other words, the new reality is not reality, but many, if not most people, see it as reality. Our machines that we have create a reality that is more real than reality. Returning to the science fiction imagery, to the vast majority of people, science fiction movies look real. They're not realistic, but they look real because that's what they're used to seeing. And then they see videos of actual space flight and they think it looks fake. You no longer have to imagine seeing dinosaurs, you can see them in 3D. And it's also my belief that they have prepared people so that when the Nephilim make their return appearance, no one's going to question them because they're going to present themselves as aliens from space or mutants like in the comic books or something similar like that. They're not going to say, "Hi, we're demons from Satan. Would you like to be my friend?" They're going to say, "We're from another planet. We're here to help you," or something like that. But the hyper real is exciting and it creates a sort of euphoria. When you see the monster on the screen, it appears real. Or when you slay the dragon in a game, or whatever thrill you feel. If you can't separate the hyper real from the real, we used to call that a mental illness, but today it's treated as an alternate lifestyle. Reality is optional. Well, what gender are you today? And you're supposed to accept that as if it's real. To them, it's real. They can't discern. And in the past, for better or for worse, battles have been fought defending against something real, such as one nation invading another, or the proletariat against the bourgeoisie, or the workers against the factory owners, or slaves against masters. But today, the battle is the real versus the hyperreal. It's a desire for experience without actually experiencing. And this has led to extremism because there's no longer any consequence for actions. And since there are no consequences, then the search for genuine experience grows more extreme. There's no more learning to cook from your grandmother or going fishing down by the stream with your buddies. It's all AI generated fantasy. And instead of the real world of family and friends, it's a battle between faceless and anonymous forces that has been unleashed by technology that can make every wish you have come true. The the biggest irony of this is that the human race labored and fought for centuries to reduce working hours in order to produce leisure time. Now, God's plan is for man to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, not in a factory perhaps, but maintaining our homes, our gardens, study, debate, work outside the home, whatever, building houses for other people. You need rest, but you also need work. Humanity knows better than God, so we reduce working hours for leisure. I know one person who will not even repair a fence for his wife because I only have to work 40 hours a week. But do we enjoy all this leisure time? We don't. Our leisure time, which was intended to be what we call living time, should be able to live whatever you're doing, live as a God, live as if you're doing things for God. But we don't have this time. It's now spent producing the society of spectacles and simulations in which we live. It's twisted and it originated with the father of lies. What did he say? He said, "Yea, hath God said." He's a great deceiver. And this all seems hopeless for the world. But as believers, we should know how things turn out in the end. The power of the hyper-real is the power to present a false sense of messiahship to people and deceive them. A false Christ, an antichrist, in place of Christ. A hyper-connected world can be controlled by whomever has power and control over the hyper-real. But we as believers should be grounded in faith and truth. John 8:32 says, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Psalm 119, verse 160. The word is true from the beginning, and every one of thy righteous judgments endures unto the age. Proverbs 12:19. The lip of truth shall be established into the future, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. I know both verses say forever. It's two different words. It's translated the same way in two different verses. One says unto the age, one says into the future. Back to our beginning verse. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Since we're starting a study on the war that's presented in Psalm 83, we're going to look at wars in general before moving to the specific. And this study is probably going to take us on a track through Ezekiel and Obadiah before we're finished. If you've never read Obadiah, you have to look in your table of contents and figure out where it is. We're going to get there. But the Bible's like a hologram. The entire picture is spread across the entire Bible. Little here, little there. You get the whole picture. But our verse begins in what is called the Olivet Discourse. The Olivet Discourse spans Matthew 23 and 25, and Jesus tells about Olivet. Olivet Discourse, Olivet Discourse. You'll get that in a minute. I apologize. I can't help myself sometimes on that one. The first verse of the Olivet Discourse is Matthew 24:3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the age? Well, there are four steps to interpreting Scripture. Whenever you read Scripture, how do you interpret it? Step one is observe the text. Step two, what does it say to the original audience? What does it say to the person to whom he was speaking? Third is, what is a principle for all time? Fourth, how do I apply this text? Now, part of observing the text is its context. And some people say the context is the surrounding verses, and that's partly true, but that's incomplete. Part of the context may be where it's spoken. Obviously, you have to know how it would apply to somebody who is not in the original audience as well. But part of the context is also who said it. In the Bible, the fourth gospel was written to the spiritual man and was apparently written by someone of the priestly class who was most probably an Essene. Luke wrote down what people remembered 20 years after the events happened. And this doesn't always match what is written elsewhere, but this is not a danger to inerrancy, because inerrancy means that it's written exactly as God wanted it written. And these things that don't match, they're there for a reason. Well, the book of Mark is like a shooting script for a movie. It's all action. Mark wrote down the action mostly based upon the testimony of Peter. Matthew, who was not a priest, he wrote down the words of Jesus exactly as Jesus spoke them. When Matthew adds commentary, he sometimes misses the point, which is also important. But as a tax collector, he knew shorthand, and he wrote down the words of Jesus exactly as he spoke them, even if they didn't make apparent sense or grammatical perfection. There's also the issue of transcription errors and intentional changes by Rabbi Akiva, as well as the Textus Receptus being back translated for some things from Luke to Matthew in order to make them match. But we know about those things, we can fix those things. But the Bible itself is self-correcting code. Make no mistake about it. Jesus was the perfect orator. And some of those areas of so-called bad grammar contain great things. And we've looked at a few of them in the past. And none of these so-called discrepancies are an error. They're there for a reason. But right now we're looking at Matthew in order to examine the exact words of Jesus. And remember, he who has ears to hear. Sometimes his words actually need to be heard out loud in order to understand the context and the subtext. But this verse has been the cornerstone of eschatology, the end time study, for the past couple of centuries. There have been all kinds of books written about it, sometimes very fanatical beliefs. Myself, I come from a traditional Baptist background. In the local church in which I grew up, we study the Bible. We studied what it said, we studied its context, and we even studied the problems within the text itself. And sadly, there are many churches today, perhaps most churches, they simply study superficially and they declare the inerrancy of the Bible, and then they apply errant understanding in order to fill the pews and make people feel good. And many local congregations, to the detriment of the church, they would declare inerrancy to a specific translation and then try to twist and twist and twist until something comes out of it. This man made doctrine is dangerous, but it's pretty prevalent today, and it's leading many believers astray down paths that are very unfruitful. But in Matthew 24, verses 4 and 5, they asked, when would these things be? And Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. Many shall come in my name. And it doesn't say a few will come in my name or a handful will come in my name. It says, many shall come in my name. And we're not going to turn there now, but Mark is similar to Matthew, and Luke has some differences, but they all say, many shall come. Who are some candidates throughout history who might fit that description? Will these deceivers actually say, I'm Christ? Some of them may, some of them have throughout history. While looking at the Jesuits, we saw that some of the popes, the Jesuit popes, they equated themselves with Christ and even had it on their hats. But most of these false people, they're not going to state it. They may imply it or they may demonstrate it in some way. Those are easy to fact check that they're not actually Christ. But what about teachers and preachers who are their own version of Christ by using selected parts of Scripture, man-made doctrines, rules, doctrines of demons that we studied a few months back, personal revelations, and they become as a God. They become Christ-like in their deception of others. And they often deceive themselves as well. That's one reason that I always make it a point to put the verse list out there. I want you to be Acts 17:11 believers and not simply take my word for what I'm saying. I want you to look at it. But there are many false teachers that demand as a pastor, you must accept what they say blindly and obediently. That is unbiblical and that is ungodly. The Bible tells you to search the scriptures daily to see if what they're saying is true. But functionally, a false teacher is a functional equivalent to Christ. Matthew 24:6. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Like I said, this is part of the Olivet Discourse. The King James Version infers or adds words that are not in the underlying text. Sometimes they do it for clarity, but often that clarity muddies things up. Here, the first word in the Greek is the Greek word melo, which means likely or destined. A common meaning of it is shall, but with a future implication. In other words, it's saying you shall be about to do this. Well, the word aluo is a verb that means hear, or to give an audience to, or to be reported, or to understand. The word koe means hearing, as in the act of hearing, or the sense of that which is heard. Preach, report, things like that are all within the cloud of meaning of this word. It's a noun, not a verb. The first here is a verb. This is a noun. When we have the noun here and the verb here together, it sounds odd to ears that speak English. The word that's translated as rumors is simply that of hearing or being aware of, which might be thought of as a report. This is not the modern sense of rumor, which is an unverified or piece of unverified information of uncertain origin, usually spread by word of mouth. That comes from the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language, 5th edition. That's a modern meaning of rumor. But this verse literally says, you shall hear a hearing. This is similar to a judicial hearing of evidence. You shall hear a hearing. This came about because the Latin has here twice but adds opinion, and the King James Version followed the Latin and translated the Latin opinion, which means opinion or rumor in the modern sense. Changed my mind. We actually are going to look at the parallel passage of Mark and Luke. Mark 13, 6 through 7. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And when you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, be you not troubled, for such things must needs be, but the end shall not be yet. Then Luke 21, verses 9 through 10. But when you shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by. Then said he unto them, Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. What people remembered 20 years later is often different from what Matthew recorded as Jesus saying. Now, Jesus is reliable. He spoke the words. Witnesses often are not. If you have three witnesses to an auto accident, there's usually going to be three different stories about what happened, and all three of them may be wrong. And the police have to sift through and try to find out what actually happened. Men often make it much more difficult or convoluted than Jesus intended, and that is a valuable lesson. It's the way God wants it. But they're not quite the same. Luke 14:31. Or what king going to make war against another king sits not down first and consults whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000? And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. So the ancient Greek word polemos is the word for war, and the resulting verb from that, warring, is polemeo. This word is used by Jesus in only one verse in Matthew, one in Mark, and one in Luke. Luke has one other occurrence of this word, and when a word is used only once, especially by Jesus, you should probably pay attention to that word. It's often used only once in order to bring attention to it. It's a special word. Matthew 24:6. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Well, the word that's translated as troubled here is the word throleo, and it means cry aloud or tell of. In other words, see that you don't cry out or tell of or against, that you're not, just see that you're not troubled. That's what it means. It's simple. But this word is used only in the Olivet Discourse of Matthew and Mark, and in Paul's second letter to the Thessalonians in chapter 2, verse 2. In Thessalonians, it seems to be out of place, so it may be a scribal error that's using a later definition. But this word is used only once by Jesus, so we should probably be paying attention to it. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Strong's Concordance has a brilliant numbering system, but the reason that I recommend the Englishman's Greek Concordance for a paper version of it, or the BDAG if you can afford it, is that Strong's tends to follow tradition that is taken from the Latin, and it uses definitions that fit what was desired of the translation rather than what the original Greek actually says. Here we have not yet. It's owapo. U is the concrete for not, and po is up to this time. Yet, at all, ever, and other similar ideas. In other words, it means not yet. It's used many times in the New Testament. Well, the word end is from the Greek word telos, which is end, purpose, or complete. Aristotle uses this word to mean completeness or a final cause or reason. What's your purpose in life? What is your end purpose in life? So what we have so far is that the hearing of wars, the report of wars, is not a sign of the final end times because the completion or purpose is not yet. And this is why we're looking at Psalm 83. There's something else to go. There have been many wars since the time that Jesus walked the earth, including religious groups at war with other religious groups, and they often cry out in some way. So when you hear about wars and hearings of wars, and remember, this is not rumors in the modern sense of the word, You're not to cry out that the end has come. How many books have been written and how many cults formed, and even legitimate sects and denominations have been misled about what one hears, usually from a false prophet, and that the end is to come. They set dates. They sell their stuff. They go sit in fields. They kill themselves. I mean, do you remember the children's story about Chicken Little? The sky is falling. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. Matthew 24:29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. Just a few verses later, Jesus talks about the sky falling. But the wars and hearings of wars is not that time. The wars and hearings of wars is just the beginning. Matthew 24:7. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. The word rise has to do with the idea of awaken. You're roused. It can even have to do with resurrection. But the word that's translated as against in this verse is the word epi, which means on, not against. It's the prefix from which we get the English word epicenter, which is literally on the center. However, at the end of the verse, the word kata, which is in, as in divers places, which means various places, does have as a primary meaning something that's in a lower position or down upon or against something or someone. It's often used specifically in a hostile sense of against something or somebody. Would wars, either secular or religious, but would wars be against places rather than in places? What would some of those places be? What's the context? Well, the word that's translated as nation has the idea of people. It's not our modern use of the word nation. This is not bad translation. We just simply changed the way that we use this word in English. The word nation originated about the 14th century, and it referred to a large group of people with common ancestry and language. And I want to repeat that. It's not modern nations. It's a group of people with common ancestry and language. It came from the Old French, having to do with descendants and relatives, which came from the Latin for birth or origin or tribe. Literally, that which has been born. Now, different derivatives have to do with procreation and family and tribal groups. That's what the word nation meant at the time that this was translated. In English, it's used in a broad sense as a race of people or an aggregation of persons of the same ethnic family and speaking the same language. In a narrow sense, it has to do with a government and subjects or citizens that constitute a political unit. It's an organized community that inhabits a defined territory within which its sovereignty is exercised. The Middle English used the word both as the older sense and beginning in the 16th century in the political society sense. But both usages were preserved in English until fairly recently in history. Even in the 17th century, American Indians were referred to using the word nation in the original sense. We still use that kind of today for some of the tribes, the Cherokee Nation. It was used in the original sense officially as late as 1879 in the Cherokee Advocate newspaper in reference to the Cherokee Indians of the Indian nations. In order to clarify the term legally, they coined a new term, nation state, about 1918 to refer to a sovereign country, the inhabitants of which are united by language, culture, and common descent. They created a new word to distinguish the two. Well, in the Introduction to the Study of International Law from 1864, a nation is defined as an organized community within a certain territory. In other words, there has to be a place where its sole sovereignty is exercised or rightfully exercised. An illegal denial of that sovereignty doesn't negate the reality of that sovereignty. In other words, they have sovereignty. But it says, for nation shall rise against nation. Has this ever happened with religious groups rather than secular powers? How about religious groups that are secular powers? Have religious groups ever awakened and then go on to previous religious establishments in some way? And these wars may be a result, these religious wars may be a result of what's called the point in time fallacy. The point in time fallacy is any theological idea or theory that comes into being at a certain point of time, and then by implication leaves everybody who existed prior to that time out of luck, for lack of a better way to put it. But if anybody says, oh, we came up with this new revelation and everybody before this, they're just out of luck, you have to really carefully analyze that and you have to think about it before believing it. And I don't want to get bogged down in studying this fallacy, but it boils down to religious wars over things that groups suddenly discovered and had never existed before. For example, believing that only one translation is divinely inspired leaves everybody prior to that translation out of luck. And people who don't study history because it's irrelevant to the present falls guilty to this fallacy, as well as judging the actions of somebody based on your time period instead of the time period in which they lived. This leads to a lot of deception within the church. But for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. There's some ambiguity here in the way that this is worded, and we're running short on time. Instead of going over the details on it, I'm just going to give you the word order of this verse. Shall awaken therefore people on people and kingdom on kingdom, and there shall be. And there shall be wars and rumors of wars, or there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, rather. But the word rise, which means waking up, is the first word in the verse. Shall awaken, therefore, people on people and kingdom on kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences. Now, I know that historically, I have to present many things from the perspective of being an American because that's what I'm most familiar with. However, there is one event in American history that changed world history in a way that's not really obvious unless you look for it. The word for nation is people. That's what the Bible says. Prior to 1776, kings waged war in the world. After 1776, people and kingdoms waged war. Prior to 1776, this verse didn't make sense. After 1776, it now makes sense, and these things can happen. That's because in 1776, the 13 British colonies and what is now the United States of America declared independence from an oppressive and tyrannical British monarchy. The war was started by what's called the shot heard around the world, and it really was. Because up until that point in time, kings waged war. But beginning with the American Revolution, followed by the French Revolution and wars after that, it was people or kingdoms who waged wars. In other words, it was people waking up on other people and kingdoms waking up on other kingdoms. And the result was that the number of deaths reached numbers that were unheard of, both to civilians and soldiers, and it only got worse. So in our verse, the word for pestilences is not in the original. The word for famine is minos, and the word for pestilences is moinos. And in modern Greek, they're actually both pronounced the same. So in our verse, it seems to be a play on words that implies both. In other words, it implies that famines and pestilences go hand in hand, even though both words aren't there. Most modern famines are man-made. They're not natural. The last time I was looking, we haven't had a natural famine in the world in about a century and a half. It's always been man trying to destroy man. But can there be a famine of the truth of what Jesus said and meant? Can there be a famine of reality? And since famines and plagues or famines and pestilences is a play on words, is it possible that earthquakes is a play on words as well? Well, the ancient Greek word for earthquakes is seismos, which simply means earthquake. And it's the word Aristotle used when discussing literal earthquakes, and it's where we get the English word seismic. But this specific word form in this verse is seismoi, and it's used in this exact form only here and in the passages in Mark and Luke. It is not used in the Septuagint at all. Now, seismoi means earthquakes, and seismoi, two words, means yours, me, or you, me. That's possessive, yours. In verse 3 that we looked at to begin with, the disciples use your. What is the sign of your coming, or what is the sign of your presence? And this seems to be a response to that question by Jesus. Jesus is speaking, and we don't have the visuals of his body language, such as pointing, like when he's talking to people and looking over there. And if he is saying yours with respect to me, using hand motions, it's an adversarial relationship with your presence, referring to the disciples. Can your adversarial relationship cause issues with Jesus? Sort of a spiritual earthquake? Matthew 4:9. This is during the testings of Jesus. And Satan says unto him, all these things will I give thee if thou wilt fall down and worship me. So during these testings, Satan's talking to Jesus and he says, I'll give you these things. And Jesus doesn't say it's not your right, because Satan is the God of this age. But this word me here is moi. And proskonesis is worship. And it comes from pros, which means to bow down, and kuneo, which means to kiss. Could bowing down to Satan lead to earthquakes? Well, remember our word for earthquakes, seismoi? Well, the end part of worship, followed by me, when combined, makes seismoi. When Jesus was speaking, he was saying the same words. He who has ears to hear would have heard these words. Matthew 24:7. The word divers is not in here. It's inferred, but it's not in the text. And since the word places, which is modified by the word in, is in the accusative tense, accusative voice, the word that's translated as in means that of downwards or towards or according to. It could also mean and then. It came to get the meaning of and then by sliding vowels and combining the words kaita into kata, not originating with the word kata. So the word place in the Greek is the word topos, where we looked at, and that's where we get the English word topology, as in the study of shapes, specifically shapes on maps. Well, toe is the definite article the, and opus is the foot or the leg. And elsewhere, Jesus uses this to refer to a fish who is following a false leader. It's not correct grammar. But Matthew wrote down exactly the words that Jesus said, and this would be understandable to anybody who was physically listening to him at the time. And Luke adds the word great earthquakes, but here it's just the fish, the foot, or the leg. The fish that's following the false leader. Ephesians 6:12. This verse should be familiar to you by now. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, and against the worldly governors, the princes of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness which are in high places. This is a summary of the opposition. This is who we're opposed to. This is not some merely vague and esoteric description of a feeling. Oh, that's just a bad guy. The word wrestle here is a play on words with again and of old and against is pros. Toward is taking it to the opposition. That's what we're supposed to do. And as a brief review of this, since it's been a while since we've gone over this verse, the principalities of old is what it means literally. It's a sort of generic evil that started after the fall of creation. This is the base case. This is kind of the feeling part of it. But the powers is literally lack of restraint. This is the next step up. This is not just a generic evil, but it's kind of generic power since the fall of creation. Then you have the worldly governors. King James translated it as rulers. They didn't want to be offensive, but it's people power. It's the people power of the darkness in the world. It's the worldly governors. This is civil governments. This is an external threat to God and to God's people. And then you have spiritual wickedness. This is oppression, and it's in high places, literally heavenly places. This is religious institutions. This is an internal threat for believers. And don't make the mistake that evil is always some other group. The threat can come from within the visible church. In the world, we have all kinds of examples of evil times. We have the Roman times, we have the Nazi times, we have modern times, certain theologians, certain religious institutions. The list is long, and you have to be aware of what's going on. So, to summarize this all up, I'm going to read verses 6 and 7 together. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and earthquakes in places. These two verses can refer to secular wars and conflicts, or it can refer to religious wars and conflicts. In parables, when you read the parables, Jesus uses nouns as sort of code words that have other meanings. The verbs always remain consistent. The verbs remain the same. The nouns are code words. This is the only place in Matthew where Jesus uses the Greek word for war, and he uses it in Matthew or in Mark and Luke in the parallel passages, and in Luke in one other verse. What type of war is Jesus describing? Is it describing secular power war or religious power war, or both? When Jesus uses a parable, or when he uses a code word story, he tends to be talking about the existing Jewish religious establishment. But the decoded parable, the other end of it, seems to refer to a future religious establishment. The future religious establishment will move mountains. It will change definitions, and it will focus the blame on the Jewish religious establishment, all while seizing power for their own use. And you see this in the world today. I see this all over social media where they blame everything on the Jews, and then they keep taking more and more power. And Jesus knew this would happen. But this is a sort of authentication code that we can use to verify by what authority Jesus did the things he did. He spoke of the present time when he was, and he was referring to the future, which is our present time. And these two verses can refer to both religious and secular conflicts. Moving on to verse 8. All these are the beginning of sorrows, or the beginning of birth pains. This word sorrows is odenon. It means birth pangs. And the Jews use this expression to refer to the sufferings of the Messiah, which were to come before the coming of Messiah. It's found in the book of Jubilees, chapter 23, verse 18, and it's found in the Apocalypse of Baruch 27 to 29. However, the word itself appears in, excuse me, the word appears in Psalm 18:5 and Acts 2:24, where it means something different. In Acts, it has the word thanatos, death, added to it to modify it, the pangs of death. And in Psalm, it has Hades added to it, the pains of hell. In other words, by itself, it's simply birth pangs. If you see this word, it's birth pangs. If you add something to it, it can become something else. So what does this mean by all of these? These are all the things listed either directly or indirectly here. And Jesus says these are the beginning, not the end, the beginning. The word beginning is the word arche, which means beginning or origin, or it could extend to mean sovereignty or authority. It's the beginning of a rope or a stick or a measuring tape, and it actually means the corner of a bed sheet, the beginning of the sheet. To measure with a ruler, you start with the beginning and you stick to it. These things are the beginning. And I know that our subject is Psalm 83. And this introduction to war took longer than I anticipated, so we're going to pick up on that next week. And I feel fairly certain that we will at least get to our main passage of Psalm 83 next week. But I do want to finish looking at wars and rumors of wars, first thing. But before we read our closing passage here, I want to put a bug in your ear because of what's going on in the world news right now. We're hearing reports of wars. And the most important one prophetically is probably what's going on in Iran right now, in which the kingdom is fighting against the nation or the people. The world has determined to keep nuclear weapons out of the hands of Muslim nations, but many Western nations have now added their entire countries and taken it and given it to Muslim invaders, including their nuclear arsenal. They're calling them immigrants, but they're invaders. So you have a Muslim nation fighting against its people. You now have Muslims in control of nuclear weapons elsewhere. This could get really interesting, but this is another example of the minority creating a chaos. So this is just to put something in your ear to think about between now and next week. But to close this evening, we're going to read on in Matthew chapter 24 a little bit. We're going to read verses 8 through 14. All these things are the beginning of sorrows. Then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and they shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, because lawlessness shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. And this word saved here is not our common salvation. This is not the born from above into the family of God salvation. This is about the saving of the soul. This is about rewards. There's a link below to our study on salvation if you missed it or if you don't remember it. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. We're almost at the beginning of the end. Exciting times coming up. We're almost at the beginning of the end, so you just need to buckle up and hang on because it's going to be a rough ride coming up. See y'all next week.